The day I became a stranger to my own children. My key didn't work. I stood there on my own front porch at 6:47 p.m., turning it again and again in a lock that no longer recognized me. That's when I understood. This wasn't a mistake. My children had changed the locks while I was at work. Let me say that again, because even now, 3 months later, it doesn't feel real. My own kids locked me out of the house I'd been paying for since before they were born. That morning started like any other Tuesday. I'd left at 6:30 a.m. with my travel mug and work boots, kissed the photo of their mother on the hallway table, the one ritual I never missed, and headed to the plant for another 10-hour shift. Emma's bedroom door had been closed, so had Jake's. I remembered thinking it was quiet, too quiet, but I was running late, and I told myself I'd talk to them at dinner, fix whatever tension had been building between us these past few months since their mother passed. I never got that chance. When I came home, back aching, hands stained with grease, carrying the pizza I'd picked up as a peace offering, I found myself locked out of my own life. I tried the back door, the side garage entrance. Every single lock had been changed. The curtains were drawn tight, but I could see movement inside. Someone walked past the living room window. My daughter. She saw me standing there, key in hand like some kind of beggar, and she just walked away. That's the moment that breaks you. Not the lock, the turning away. I called out to them, knocked, then pounded. The neighbor's porch lights started flicking on one by one, and I realized how I must have looked. A desperate man shouting at his own house, a stranger on a doorstep that used to be home. Mrs. Chen from next door asked if I needed help, and I didn't know how to answer. How do you explain that your children have erased you? Standing there in the cold November darkness, I finally understood something I'd been too blind to see. This wasn't about today. This was about every day I'd gotten wrong. Every conversation I'd avoided. Every moment I'd chosen work over them, silence over honesty, grief over connection. The lock was just the final click of a door that had been closing for months. There's a particular kind of pain that comes from being rejected by your own blood. It doesn't stab, it hollows you out from the inside, echoes in the empty spaces where love used to live. As I drove to a Motel 6 that night with nothing but my work clothes and a cold pizza, I kept asking myself the same question on repeat. When did I lose them? What was the exact moment I stopped being dad and became the enemy? I found out the answer 2 days later, and it shattered everything I thought I knew about my family.
But before I tell you what I discovered, before I share the note Emma left under the doormat at 2 a.m., the secret Jake had been hiding for 8 months, and the truth about their mother's last words that changed everything, I need you to understand something. This isn't just my story. This is the story of every parent who's looked across the dinner table and realized they don't recognize the people they raised. Every father who worked himself into exhaustion thinking sacrifice equals love. Every person who stood on the outside of something they built with their own hands, wondering how they became a stranger. Maybe you're living this right now. Maybe someone you love has locked you out, literally or figuratively, and you're standing in the cold trying to understand where it all went wrong. Maybe you're the child who changed the locks, carrying pain your parent doesn't even know they caused. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever been the outsider in your own story, hit that like button. Drop a comment telling me, have you ever had to lock someone out to protect yourself, or been locked out by someone you love? Because what happened next, the real reason behind those changed locks, it's not what you think, and it's going to change how you see every family conflict you've ever witnessed. Subscribe now, because this is just chapter 1 of a 10-part story about the lies we tell ourselves, the secrets that destroy families, and the impossible road back to forgiveness. Some doors, once locked, might never open again, but some do. And how that happens, that's why you need to hear what came next. That night at the Motel 6, my phone buzzed at 2:47 a.m. It was a text from an unknown number. "Dad, we need to talk, but not about what you think. Emma." That's when I knew. I didn't just lose my house that day. I'd lost something much bigger, and I hadn't even realized it was at stake. Let me take you back to where this really began. My key didn't work. That simple fact, metal refusing to turn in a cylinder, became the hinge on which my entire existence swung into darkness. I stood on my front porch at 6:47 p.m., the November cold seeping through my work jacket, and understood with sudden, terrible clarity that my children had changed the locks while I was at work. Not forgotten to give me a new key, not made a mistake. They had deliberately erased my access to the house I'd been paying for since before Emma was born, before Jake learned to walk, before their mother got sick. Let me say that again, because even now, 3 months into this nightmare, it doesn't feel real. My own kids locked me out of the house where I'd rocked them through nightmares and built them a treehouse and taught them how to ride bikes. The house where their mother died in the master bedroom while I held her hand and they stood in the doorway, too afraid to come closer.
That morning had started like any Tuesday since the funeral. I'd left at 6:30 with my thermos and steel-toed boots, paused at the hallway table to kiss Linda's photo, the one ritual I never missed, the one thing that made me feel like she was still watching over us, and headed to the plant for another 10-hour shift. Emma's bedroom door had been closed, so had Jake's. I remembered standing there in the hallway, hand raised to knock, wanting to check on them the way I used to check on them when they were small. But they were 22 and 19 now, not children anymore, and I'd learned these past months that they needed space to grieve in their own ways. Too quiet, I'd thought. The house was too quiet. But I was running late, and Ron from Quality Control had texted about a problem with the hydraulic press, and I told myself I'd talk to them at dinner. Fix whatever tension had been building between us since the funeral. Since before the funeral, if I'm being honest. Since Linda got her diagnosis and everything started falling apart in slow motion. I never got that chance. When I came home, back screaming, hands black with grease despite scrubbing them twice in the plant bathroom, carrying the pizza I'd picked up from Giuseppe's as a peace offering because it was Emma's favorite, I found myself locked out of my own life. I tried the back door, the side entrance through the garage. Every single lock had been changed. The curtains were drawn tight against the early November darkness, but I could see movement inside through a gap in the kitchen blinds. Someone walked past the living room window. My daughter. She saw me standing there, key in hand like some kind of beggar on his own doorstep, and she just walked away. Didn't pause, didn't hesitate, just turned her back and disappeared into the interior of the house. That's the moment that breaks you. Not the lock, the turning away. I called out to them, first Emma's name, then Jake's. My voice sounded strange in the cold air, too loud and too desperate. I knocked. Then I pounded, my grease-stained fist against the door I'd painted colonial blue 3 summers ago, when Linda could still walk without assistance and the kids still laughed at my jokes. The neighbor's porch lights started flicking on one by one, like eyes opening in the darkness. The Hendersons across the street, the Patel family next door. Mrs. Chen from the corner house, standing on her porch in her bathrobe, phone in hand, probably wondering if she should call the police on the man attacking his own front door. "Everything okay there, Mike?" she called out, her voice careful and concerned. Mrs. Chen had brought us casseroles after Linda died. 7 different casseroles in 9 days. Each one a small kindness I hadn't known how to accept or reciprocate. Didn't know how to answer her. How do you explain that your children have erased you? That the people you raised, fed, protected, loved with every exhausted fiber of your being have decided you no longer deserve to exist in their space? I stood there with the pizza box going cold in my hands, my breath coming out in white clouds, and I felt the weight of all those watching eyes. The neighbors who'd known my family for 15 years, who'd watched my kids grow up, who'd brought flowers to Linda's funeral, now witnessing my humiliation? The desperate father, the man who couldn't keep his own family together. "Just a misunderstanding," I managed to say. My voice cracked on the last word. "Just a mix-up with the keys." Mrs. Chen didn't look convinced, but she nodded and went back inside. The porch lights stayed on, though. They were still watching. Everyone was watching me fail at the most basic requirement of fatherhood, keeping your children close. I tried calling Emma's cell phone. It rang 4 times, then went to voicemail. Her voice on the recording, bright, young, the way she used to sound before her mother got sick, felt like a knife. "Hey, this is Emma. Leave a message and I'll get back to you." Except she wouldn't. I knew she wouldn't. I called Jake's phone next, straight to voicemail. No ringing at all. He'd blocked me. Standing there in the cold November darkness, watching my neighbors' silhouettes move behind their curtains, I finally understood something I'd been too blind or too stubborn to see. This wasn't about today. This wasn't about one argument or one mistake. This was about every day I'd gotten wrong. Every conversation I'd avoided because I was too tired or too angry or too deep in my own grief. Every moment I'd chosen work over them, silence over honesty, my own pain over theirs. The lock was just the final click of a door that had been closing for months, maybe longer. There's a particular kind of pain that comes from being rejected by your own blood. It doesn't stab. It hollows you out from the inside, echoes in the empty spaces where love used to live. As I drove to the Motel 6 on Route 32, the pizza box sliding across the passenger seat every time I turned, I kept asking myself the same question on repeat. When did I lose them? What was the exact moment I stopped being dad and became the enemy? Was it the day Linda died, when I couldn't stop crying long enough to comfort them? Was it the week after the funeral when I went back to work because I couldn't stand being in that house with her absence filling every room? Was it earlier, during those last terrible months when I spent every night at the hospital and left them alone to fend for themselves, 2 kids barely out of their teens, trying to hold together a house that was falling apart?
The motel clerk didn't look at me twice when I checked in. Just another working man down on his luck. Room 117, 2nd floor, overlooking the parking lot and a dumpster that smelled like rotting fast food. I sat on the edge of the bed, industrial-grade comforter in a pattern designed to hide stains, and opened the pizza box. Giuseppe's Special, the one Emma loved with the roasted red peppers and goat cheese. It was cold now, congealed, inedible. I ate it anyway, forcing it down bite by tasteless bite, because I was starving and because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. The room smelled like bleach and old cigarettes, though there was a no smoking sign bolted to the door. The television was bolted down too. Everything in this room was designed for people who'd lost the right to be trusted with basic things. I fit right in. I called Emma again. Voicemail. I called Jake. Blocked. I opened my text messages and started typing a dozen different versions of the same plea. Please talk to me. Let me explain. I'm sorry for whatever I did. But every version sounded wrong, inadequate, the words of a man who didn't understand the depth of his own failure. I deleted them all. Around midnight, I gave up trying to sleep and turned on the television. Late-night infomercials for kitchen gadgets and miracle cleaning products. The kind of thing Linda used to make fun of when we couldn't sleep together in those last weeks, when the pain kept her awake and I held her hand through the darkness. "Who buys a vegetable chopper at 2 a.m.?" she'd whispered once, her voice thin with morphine and exhaustion. "Desperate people," I'd answered, trying to make her smile. "People who think the right kitchen tool will fix everything." Now I was the desperate person, looking for something, anything, that would fix what I'd broken. I found out the answer 2 days later, and it shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. Have you ever been locked out by someone you love? Not just from a house, but from their heart? What would you do if your own children erased you from their lives? That night at the Motel 6, my phone buzzed at 2:47 a.m. I'd been staring at the ceiling for hours, watching the red numbers on the digital clock flip from one meaningless minute to the next when the notification lit up the darkness. A text from an unknown number. Dad, we need to talk, but not about what you think. Emma. My hands shook as I read it 3 times, 4 times, trying to decode what "not about what you think" could possibly mean. What did I think? That they hated me? That I'd failed them? That they blamed me for their mother's death somehow? For not being enough? For not saving her when there was nothing to be saved? I typed back immediately. Emma, please, where are you? Let me come home. The message showed as delivered but not read. She'd sent her message and then turned off her phone, or put it aside, leaving me with those 11 words that promised explanation but delivered only more mystery. I didn't sleep. At 5:30 a.m., I got in my truck and drove back to the house. The street was dark and quiet, the neighborhood still sleeping. I parked across the street, behind the Hendersons' minivan, and waited. What was I waiting for? Some sign that my children were alive in there? Some proof that this wasn't all a nightmare I'd eventually wake up from?
At 6:15, a car pulled into my driveway. Not a car I recognized, a silver Honda Civic with a dent in the rear bumper. A woman got out, mid-30s, professional clothes, carrying a leather briefcase. She walked up to my front door like she belonged there and knocked. Emma answered immediately, like she'd been waiting. They talked for a few minutes on the porch, the woman gesturing with her hands, Emma nodding. Then the woman got back in her car and drove away. A lawyer. That was a lawyer. My children had hired a lawyer. I sat in my truck, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to understand, trying to breathe. What legal right did they have to lock me out of my own house? I'd been paying the mortgage for 23 years. My name was on the deed. Linda's name too. But she was gone, and surely that meant what? What did it mean? I didn't know. I didn't know anything anymore. I waited until 7, until I knew I'd be late for work, and then I got out of the truck. I walked across the street, slowly, obviously wanting Emma to see me through the window if she was watching. But no curtains moved, no faces appeared. I stood on the porch. My porch, I reminded myself, though it no longer felt like mine. And that's when I noticed the edge of paper sticking out from under the doormat. A note, written in Emma's careful handwriting on a page torn from her college notebook. The same notebook she'd used to take notes at her mother's bedside during those last weeks, documenting symptoms and medication times, like she could organize her mother's death into something manageable. The note said, "Dad, I'm sorry it had to be this way. But after what Jake told me, I can't let you in the house right now. We need time. We need space. We need answers. There are things about Mom's last days that you never told us, things that change everything. The lawyer says we have the right to ask you to stay away for 72 hours while we figure this out. Please respect that. Please don't make this harder. E." Things about Mom's last days. Things I never told them. I read the note 7 times standing on that porch, the paper shaking in my hands. Things about Mom's last days that you never told us. Things that change everything. What things? What could Jake possibly have told Emma that made her hire a lawyer and lock me out of my own house? I'd been there every day during Linda's final weeks, every single day. I'd held her hand through the worst pain, stroked her hair when she vomited from the medication, read to her when she was too weak to hold a book herself. I'd done everything right, hadn't I? But even as I thought it, I knew it wasn't true. There were things I hadn't told them, things Linda had made me promise to keep quiet, things that seemed merciful at the time, but now felt like lies festering in the dark. The morphine, for instance. How toward the end, when the pain got so bad that Linda couldn't speak without screaming, the hospice nurse had pulled me aside and quietly increased the dosage beyond what the doctor had prescribed. "It'll help her sleep," she'd said, her voice low and kind. "Help her be comfortable." I'd nodded, signed the form, watched as Linda slipped deeper and deeper into unconsciousness over those last 2 days, barely waking, barely aware of her children standing at her bedside begging her to open her eyes. Was that what Jake had discovered? Had he found the medical records somehow, seen the morphine levels, thought I'd, what, killed his mother?
hastened her death? Or was it the other thing? The thing I'd never told anyone. The conversation Linda and I had 3 days before she died, when she was still lucid enough to make terrible choices. When she'd looked at me with those sunken eyes and said, "I can't do this anymore, Mike. I can't keep fighting. Promise me you'll let me go. Promise me you won't let them make me fight past the point where there's anything left to fight for." I'd promised, and I'd kept that promise. When the oncologist suggested one more round of chemotherapy, one more experimental treatment, I'd said no. Linda had signed a DNR 2 weeks earlier, but the kids didn't know that. They'd been at college, trying to maintain some normalcy, and we'd decided not to burden them with every terrible decision. They came home for Thanksgiving break, and their mother was suddenly dying, suddenly giving up, and they'd looked at me like I should do something, like I should save her. "Why aren't they trying anything else?" Emma had demanded, standing in the hospital corridor while Linda slept. "There has to be something, another drug, another trial, something." "There isn't," I'd said, but I didn't tell her that there was, that Linda had chosen not to fight anymore, that we'd both chosen, together. Is that what they thought? That I'd given up on their mother? That I'd let her die when there were still options, still hope? But there wasn't hope. Linda knew that. I knew that. The doctors knew that. Another round of chemo would have bought her maybe 2 more months of agony, 2 more months of vomiting and pain, and watching her body destroy itself cell by cell. She'd wanted to die at home, peacefully, with dignity. I'd given her that. I'd thought I was doing the right thing. Now, standing on my porch with Emma's note in my hands and my children locked inside refusing to see me, I wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake. Not in letting Linda go, I'd do that again, I'd give her that peace again, but in not telling them, in not making them understand. If someone you loved was dying and begged you to let them go peacefully, would you honor their wish, even if it meant your children might never forgive you for not fighting harder? I had to find Jake, that much was clear. Whatever he'd told Emma, whatever he'd discovered or thought he'd discovered, it was poisoning both of them against me. I drove to the community college where he was supposed to be taking classes, automotive repair, following in my footsteps whether I wanted him to or not. The student center was mostly empty at 8:30 on a Wednesday morning. I asked 3 different kids if they'd seen Jake Murphy, described him, tall, my build, his mother's dark eyes, usually wearing a black hoodie. They all shook their heads, didn't know him, never heard of him. The registrar's office told me they couldn't give out information about students without proper authorization. "I'm his father," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I just want to know if he's attending classes." The woman behind the counter, name tag said Patricia, kind face, probably a mother herself, looked at me with something like pity. "I'm sorry, sir. Privacy laws. You'd need written permission from the student." Written permission from the son who'd blocked my number and changed the locks on our house? I drove to his girlfriend's apartment next. Melissa. Sweet girl. Studying to be a veterinary technician, loved animals more than people. She answered the door in scrubs, about to leave for class or work. Her face shuddered when she saw me. "Mr. Murphy," she said, not opening the door wider, not inviting me in. "Is Jake here?" "No." "Do you know where he is? I really need to talk to him. It's important." She looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something in her expression. Not pity like Patricia, something harder, judgment. "He doesn't want to talk to you right now," she said finally. "And honestly, I don't blame him." "What did he tell you? Whatever you think I did." "It's not about what I think you did," Melissa interrupted. "It's about what you didn't do, what you kept from them." She started to close the door, then paused. "Jake's been working 2 jobs since June, Mr. Murphy. Did you know that? Night shift at the warehouse and weekends at AutoZone. He dropped out of school in July. Dropped out and didn't tell anyone because he was trying to keep the house, trying to pay the bills you stopped paying after Mrs. Murphy died." The ground tilted under my feet. I've been paying the mortgage, the utilities, everything. "Have you checked your bank statements lately?" Melissa asked, And there was something in her voice that made my stomach drop. "Jake's been covering what you haven't. He found the past due notices, the letters from the bank, the second mortgage you took out to pay for Mrs. Murphy's treatments. He's been trying to save your house while you've been what? Disappearing into work? Pretending everything was fine?" I couldn't breathe, couldn't process what she was saying. Past due notices? Second mortgage? I'd taken out a home equity line to cover Linda's medical bills, yes, but I'd been making payments, hadn't I? When was the last time I'd actually looked at my bank account? When was the last time I'd opened the mail instead of leaving it in a pile on the kitchen counter for someone else to deal with? For my 19-year-old son to deal with while I hid at work for 60 hours a week because I couldn't stand being in that house with Linda's ghost in every room. 3 months behind, Melissa continued. Jake found out in June, right after graduation. He was supposed to start college in September, but instead, he's working himself to death trying to fix what you broke, and you didn't even notice? I drove back to the motel in a fog. Pulled over twice because my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't hold the steering wheel straight. Jake had dropped out of school. Jake had been working 2 jobs. Jake had been trying to save our house while... What? What had I been doing? Working, yes. Showing up at the plant every day, clocking in and out, going through the motions of being a responsible adult while my son shouldered burdens that should never have been his to carry. I sat in the motel parking lot and forced myself to open my banking app. I hadn't looked at it in months, maybe longer. After Linda died, basic functioning had become impossibly difficult. Eating, sleeping, showing up to work. Those were the only things I could manage. Bills, paperwork, anything that required sustained attention, I'd just pushed it aside. Told myself I'd deal with it later. Later never came. The mortgage was 4 months behind. 4 months! The first notice from the bank was dated July 15th, 3 weeks after Linda's death. The second notice came in August, the third in September, each one more urgent than the last, threatening foreclosure. And I'd never seen them, never opened the envelopes. Jake had found them first. Jake had read those threats and decided to save us. The utility bills showed irregular payments. Sometimes they were paid on time. Sometimes they were late. The amounts varied, smaller payments than usual, as if someone was cobbling together whatever money they could find. Jake had been making minimum payments on everything, trying to keep the lights on and the water running while I collected my paycheck and spent it on what? Where had the money gone? I scrolled through my transaction history and felt sick. Bars. I'd been going to bars after work, drinking away my grief with guys from the plant. 200 here, 300 there. Money that should have kept us afloat poured down my throat instead. Linda would have been so ashamed of me, so disappointed. She'd worked 2 jobs herself when the kids were young, juggled daycare schedules and split shifts so we could save for their college funds. She'd planned every penny, budgeted down to the dollar, and I'd destroyed it all in 6 months of deliberate blindness. I found the home equity line of credit statement next. $83,000 borrowed against the house to pay for experimental treatments and hospital bills insurance wouldn't cover. Monthly payment, $1,400. Payments made, 0. Not since June. How had Jake been covering that? He couldn't have been. Not on warehouse wages and AutoZone money. Which meant, oh God, which meant the house was going into foreclosure. Which meant Jake's desperate efforts had been futile. Which meant I'd lost everything. My wife, my children's trust, and now the house where we'd built our life together. I called the bank. Spoke to a loan officer named Steve who probably dealt with desperate people like me every day. "Mr. Murphy," he said, his voice professionally sympathetic, "we've been trying to reach you for months. You have options. You can apply for loan modification, set up a payment plan, but you need to act quickly. The foreclosure process has already begun. I made an appointment for the next day, hung up, stared at my phone. Then I did something I should have done months ago. I called Linda's sister, Diane, the one person in Linda's family who hadn't completely written me off after the funeral.
"Mike?" she answered on the third ring. "I was wondering when you'd call." "Diane, I need help. My voice broke. "I'm losing everything. The kids have locked me out. Jake's been trying to save the house, and I didn't know. And now it's too late, and I don't know how to fix this." Silence on the other end. Then, "I know, Mike. Jake called me 3 weeks ago, asked if I could loan him money. I said no. I couldn't process it. Your nephew asked you for help, and you said no?" "I said no, because it's not my job to enable you, Mike." Diane's voice was hard, harder than I'd ever heard it. "Jake is 19 years old. He shouldn't be taking out payday loans and working himself into exhaustion because his father checked out. He shouldn't be lying to his sister about why he dropped out of school. He needs you to step up, not me, you." "I didn't know he needed me to." "Stop. Just stop," Diane cut me off. "You didn't know because you didn't want to know. That's not the same thing as ignorance. That's cowardice." The word hit like a physical blow. Coward? Is that what I was? What I'd become? "There's something else you need to know," Diane continued. "Something Linda told me before she died. Something she made me promise not to tell you unless you completely fell apart. Well, congratulations, Mike. You've fallen apart." My heart started racing. "What are you talking about?" "Linda knew she was dying months before she told you. The doctor told her in March that the cancer had spread to her bones. Terminal. 6 months, maybe 8 if she was lucky. She didn't tell you right away because she wanted to plan. She wanted to make sure the kids would be okay after she was gone. She updated her will, she set up life insurance policies, she made arrangements. She told me in April. She did tell me. She told you in April because she couldn't hide it anymore," Diane said. "But she'd known for 5 weeks already. 5 weeks of planning while you went to work every day thinking everything was fine. And you know what she did with that time? She wrote letters, one for Emma, one for Jake. Letters they weren't supposed to read until after she died. Letters where she told them everything. About the cancer timeline, about the financial situation, about her fears for all of you. I felt like I was drowning. Where are these letters?" She gave them to her lawyer. Instructions to deliver them 6 months after her death. She wanted to give you time to grieve first, time to get your feet under you. But the lawyer delivered them early because Jake called and asked. Because Jake was worried about losing the house, and he needed to know if his mother had left any provisions for them. The lawyer gave him the letters 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago. That's when everything started falling apart. That's when Jake found out that his mother had known how bad things were, that she tried to protect them, that I'd failed to do the same. What did the letters say? I don't know exactly. Linda didn't tell me everything, but she told me enough. She told me she was worried about you, about your drinking, about how you'd been pulling away from the kids even before she got sick, about how you were so consumed with guilt over things you couldn't control that you'd stopped paying attention to things you could control. She loved you, Mike, right up to the end, but she was terrified you'd let yourself fall apart after she died. And she was right. I sat in my truck in the motel parking lot, phone pressed to my ear, and felt the full weight of my failure crash over me. Linda had known. She'd known I would do this. She'd known, and she'd tried to protect the kids from me, from my weakness, from my inability to cope without her holding everything together. "The letters," I managed to say. "Did she say anything about letting her go? About the decisions we made at the end?" Diane was quiet for a long moment. "She told them the truth, Mike, that she asked you not to pursue aggressive treatment, that it was her choice, that she didn't want them to remember her suffering more than necessary. She defended you. Even in death, she was trying to protect you. I went to the house the next morning with Diane's words still ringing in my head. Coward. Fallen apart. Linda had known I'd fail, and I'd proven her right. But I wasn't going to be a coward anymore. Not today. I parked in my own driveway for the first time in 4 days and walked up to the door that used to be mine. I knocked, waited, knocked again. After 5 minutes, Emma opened the door, but she didn't open it wide, just a crack with the chain still on. The 72 hours aren't up yet, she said. I know, but I talked to Diane. I know about the letters. I know what your mother told you, and I need to explain. There's nothing to explain. Mom's letter explained everything. She knew she was dying, and she chose to stop treatment. You supported her decision. We get it. Then why did you lock me out? If you understand, because it's not about Mom's death, Emma interrupted. Her voice was shaking now, with anger or grief or both. It's about everything after. It's about you disappearing. It's about Jake sacrificing everything to keep this house while you spent money at bars. It's about you acting like we didn't exist. Tender another moment. It's about you acting like we didn't exist, like we didn't matter, like losing Mom meant you could just stop being our father. The truth of her words knocked the air out of my lungs. I know, you're right. I haven't been there. I haven't been the father you needed.
We lost her too, Emma said, and now she was crying. We lost her too, and then we lost you. You were right there in the house, going to work, coming home, but you weren't there. You were a ghost. And Jake, God, Mike, do you have any idea what Jake's been going through? He's been trying to hold everything together. The house, the bills, me, himself. He's been carrying all of it alone because you couldn't. I heard footsteps behind her. Jake appeared in the hallway, and I barely recognized him. He'd lost weight. His face looked older, harder. My 19-year-old son looked like a man who'd lived 40 years of struggle. Let him in, he said quietly. Emma stepped back, unchained the door. I walked into my own house for the first time in 4 days, and it felt like walking into a stranger's home. Everything was the same. Linda's paintings still on the walls, the photo of us at the Grand Canyon still on the mantel, but everything was different too. There was a stack of bills on the kitchen counter, organized into neat piles. Past due, current, overdue. Jake's handwriting on sticky notes marking each one with payment dates and amounts. I found Mom's papers in June, Jake said, not looking at me. Her will, the life insurance policies, the letter explaining everything. I thought maybe there'd be money we could use for the mortgage. There was insurance money, but it was supposed to go to our college funds. Mom wanted us to have an education. She'd been planning for that since we were kids. You should use that money, I said, for school, for your futures. That's what she wanted. What she wanted, Jake said, his voice rising now, was for us to have a father who didn't fall apart. What she wanted was for you to take care of us the way she took care of all of us our whole lives. But you couldn't do that. So I used the insurance money to pay the mortgage, 3 months' worth. I used up Emma's fund and half of mine keeping this house because I thought, I don't know what I thought, that I could fix everything, that I could be enough. Jake, I dropped out of school, he continued, words pouring out now like he'd been holding them back for months. I got a job at the warehouse, night shift, 11 to 7, then AutoZone on weekends. I've been sleeping 4 hours a day and trying to keep everything from falling apart. And you didn't notice. You didn't notice I wasn't in school. You didn't notice I was never home. You didn't notice anything because you were too busy drinking yourself numb. I had no defense, no excuse. Everything he was saying was true. I'm sorry, I said, and the words felt pathetically inadequate. I'm so sorry. I should have been there. I should have noticed. I should have been your father instead of making you be mine. Emma was crying harder now, sitting on the couch with her face in her hands. Jake's jaw was clenched, holding back tears of his own. And I stood there in the middle of the living room, my house, my family. and felt the full weight of what I'd destroyed. We sat in that living room for 3 hours. Emma and Jake told me everything I'd missed while I was hiding in my grief. Emma's panic attacks that started a month after the funeral, waking up at 3 a.m. convinced she couldn't breathe, convinced she was dying like her mother died. Jake's breaking point in August, when he'd worked 36 hours straight between both jobs and nearly crashed his car driving home. The times they'd tried to talk to me, tried to reach me, and I'd given them one-word answers or excuses about being tired. The times they'd eaten dinner alone because I was at O'Malley's bar instead of coming home. "I thought I was protecting you," I said when they'd finished. "I thought if I kept working, kept the routines going, kept everything normal on the surface, you'd be okay. I thought my grief was my burden to carry, and I shouldn't put it on you." "We needed to grieve together," Emma said softly. "We needed you to cry with us, to talk about her, to remember her. Instead, you acted like she'd never existed, like if we just didn't talk about it, the pain would go away." She was right. I'd erased Linda from our daily lives because I couldn't bear to speak her name without breaking. I'd packed away her clothes, her jewelry, her books. I'd taken down photos because seeing her face hurt too much. I'd silenced all of us in my attempt to silence my own agony. "I read Mom's letter 100 times, Jake said. "The part where she talks about you. She said you were the strongest man she knew, but that your strength came from her. That without her, you'd need us to be strong for you sometimes. She was asking us to take care of you, but we couldn't do that and also hold everything else together. We're not her. We can't be her." The truth of that statement hit me hard. I'd expected my children to fill the Linda-shaped hole in our family, to hold us together the way she'd always held us together. But they were grieving too. They were struggling too. They needed a father, not another dependent. "I called the bank yesterday," I told them. "Set up a meeting about loan modification. I'm going to fix the mortgage situation. I'm going to pay back the money you spent from the insurance funds. And I'm going back to school, you're going back to school. This semester might be lost, but next semester you start fresh. Both of you." "How?" Jake asked. "The money's gone. I'll take extra shifts. I'll get a second job if I have to. I'll figure it out. That's my job, not yours." I looked at both of them, my daughter with her mother's eyes, my son with her determination. I can't promise I won't mess up again. I can't promise grief won't knock me down sometimes. But I promise I'll try. I promise I'll show up. I promise I'll be your father, not another burden you have to carry. Emma came and sat next to me on the couch. She didn't hug me, not yet, but she sat close enough that our shoulders touched. "We changed the locks because we were angry," she said. "Because we needed you to see what you'd been doing, locking us out of your grief, locking us out of your life. We wanted you to feel what that felt like.